Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Evening Commute, a revolution in micromobility. Thanks for joining us this evening. We're going to have an excellent webinar. We've got a great lineup of panelists. My name is Kelly Urich, and I'm a program manager at Forth. For those of you that are not familiar with Forth, we're a Portland-based nonprofit that promotes electric transportation, and that includes bikes, cars, buses, and trucks. Anything that's got wheels and has an electric motor is right in our wheelhouse. So today, we're going to explore a cross-section from the world of electric micromobility. Our panelists represent electric bikes, scooters, and skateboards, as well as the people who collect and analyze data on these modes of transportation. They'll be talking about where we are in electric transportation and where we're going. So I'll start by introducing our panelists. First is Jess Stetson. She's the head of growth at Ride Report. She has more than a decade of experience using technology to solve complex problems. She's worked with sensitive data to define policies and forge solutions that address public agency needs while maintaining privacy and security for varied stakeholders, and has deep software integration experience. At Ride Report, she helps cities make data-driven decisions about compliance, auditing, and policy so people move around sustainably, efficiently, and equitably. Next up is Maurice Henderson. And I apologize, Maurice is, we're working to get Maurice's webcam working. So hopefully we'll be able to see Maurice sometime shortly. But Maurice is a director of government partnerships at Bird. Nearly his entire career has been focused on providing people with equitable access to opportunities, most recently in his smart cities work. He has served as Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler's chief of staff and deputy director at Portland Bureau of Transportation. He also is currently on Forth's board. Another speaker, Joe DeSimone, had a last-minute emergency this evening, so he may be joining us a little bit later, in which case I'll be glad to give him an introduction. But for now, I'll move on to our next panelist, which is going to be Christian DeStoop. Christian is a business developer for scooter market maker startup Concept GEEBEE. He has 20 years of experience in the industry and is passionate about sustainability and anything that has wheels. He lives in Montreal, Canada, with his wife and children. And then finally, we've got Jack Mudd, who is the chief evangelist at Onewheel and has been with the company since its inception in 2013. So the schedule for today's webinar is the following. Jess Stetson from Ride Report will give a 10-minute introduction to talk about where we are in electric mobility today and where we may be going. Then we'll hear from each of our panelists for about 5 minutes describing their company and what they do. And finally, we'll open it up for a 30 to 40-minute Q&A. And just as a little bit of housekeeping, you can use the attendee chat feature, which is located on the left-hand side of your webinar panel, to ask any questions that you have for any of the panelists. We'll be answering those throughout. So one last thing before we get started, we're going to do a few polls throughout the evening tonight. And so the first one, I will launch that right now. Let's see. Just verifying here. Okay. All right, so you should be seeing the poll on your screen now. And so the question is, do you use electric mobility? And if so, what type? So I'm getting our live results here. Many people on this webinar do not use electric mobility currently. Let's see. All right, I'm seeing the numbers are changing more slowly. And let's see. I don't know how to. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and I unfortunately can't figure out how to share the results with you, so I will read them. So about half of us do not use electric mobility. Another 10% of this group use e-bikes. another 4% scooters, and then I lost the choices after that. So my apologies. But with that, I think it's time to move on to our first panelist, Jess from Ride Report. And let me get your slides loaded up here. I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Kelly. Maurice, I'm very happy to see your face. I'm glad that we get all of our panelists smiling at us tonight. So, hi there, I'm Jess. I am the head of growth at Ride Report. And for those of you who don't know Ride Report, we are a Portland, Oregon-based company with a mission to make micromobility work. We see our software tools as enabling a program for right-of-way management that can be replicated with other new mobility modes. I also want to quickly define micromobility for the purposes of this presentation as focusing on a shared dockless scooter system, e-bikes, and to a lesser extent, regular bikes. So the birds and the limes of the world are really what we're talking about here. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a few minutes reminding everyone of what micromobility looks like, what feels like several decades ago, but was truly only 4 or 5 months ago, micromobility before COVID, if you will. So what happened? The dockless bike share phenomenon in China was followed by Bird's launch of its scooters in Santa Monica in the fall of 2017, and that set off a flurry of companies trying to gain foothold in the market. The speed of growth caught the public and therefore cities off guard, so there was a scramble to understand it and regulate it. Cities did not want to see a repeat of TNCs, so think Uber and Lyft, where they were not able to have a say in what happened on their streets, and public reaction was, at a minimum, mixed. From riders in San Francisco who literally said they could not imagine living without it, this was only 3 days after they launched there, to non-riders physically placing them in curb cuts to try to create public relations nightmare and prove that micromobility was incompatible with cities. It certainly got a lot of press, as I'm sure many of you are aware. Here is a snapshot of how many companies got involved in micromobility. So the chart on the right shows only operators, and needless to say, the number of operators was not really sustainable. So operators weren't able to make enough revenue with such fierce competition, particularly with the significant fees and regulations imposed by cities. Riders were confused about having to download so many apps, and cities were spending significant resources just trying to manage programs that didn't create big headaches. By the beginning of 2020, there were significant signs that many of these companies were either going to go out of business or be consolidated with other operators. So let's talk about the current state. COVID obviously came along, and what we really saw at Ride Report was that it kicked the industry when it was already down, and it really sped along some of the trends that we were seeing in the market. So during the height of the shutdown in the US, people reduced travel altogether. Obviously, we all experienced that. And you can see that as the economy reopened, people did start to drive and walk more, getting back to pre-pandemic levels. However, you can also see that public transit has continued to take a huge hit and will likely be the last to get back to regular levels. In fact, some of our customers that we work with have said that they aren't expecting to be back to regular levels again until at least 2026. This is due obviously to both people's fear of traveling on transit and also the reduced service levels as a result of the economic recession. If travel trends go back to pre-pandemic levels, there's not sufficient space on our roadways if all those transit drivers or riders decide to start driving instead. So that is of major concern. We do have a little bit of a glimpse, though, of what could happen. So in New Zealand, there are virtually no cases and no restrictions there unless you arrive from outside the country. And you can see that while their transit is definitely down, it has recovered much more significantly than in the United States. And so this is a positive sign for when the US hopefully inevitably gets there. One of the big changes in the United States is the number of people starting to ride bikes, either for the first time or the first time in a really long time, which is where I sit. Much of this was for recreation during the shutdown, but it can also set new behaviors for more utilitarian travel as people start to resume their normal travel. People are also discovering the magic of e-bikes as a way to cover longer distances and be a true alternative to driving and transit trips. So let's look specifically at shared micromobility. There was a similarly enormous drop-off in use globally during the shutdown, but we are starting to see a recovery as the economy reopens. The top chart there, the one in the upper right-hand corner, shows February versus April of this year. There was a greater than 90% reduction in vehicles available for rent, and those that were available for rent were being used 90% less often. The line chart at the bottom shows the maximum number of vehicles available for rent in one of our ride report markets. So if you went out and you stepped on the street, how many could you find on any given day? You can see that operators are starting to put vehicles out at a similar amount as before, but obviously all of this is still in flux with the state of the pandemic. That being said, there was an article on, I think, KGW, which is a local station here in Portland, earlier today that said that scooters are actually back above pre-COVID levels. So in Portland, at least, we are seeing quite a few riders. We've also seen a change in the shape of the trips during the pandemic. So pre-COVID on the top, now on the bottom, there are a higher proportion of trips that are longer, indicating maybe more use for recreation or possibly for essential workers who are affected by that transit shutdown. The pandemic created a bit of a laboratory, is what I call it, for companies to try different operating and business models. So as an example, for Spin, they offered reduced and even free fares for people using their scooters for essential workers. A company in New Zealand, they actually pivoted to offering food delivery via their scooters when that country was only partially opened back up. Another company that we've worked with, Pony in France, adapted its shared approach to meet the pandemic by offering multiple programs. As an example, longer-term rentals and safety protocols such as cleaning procedures for the vehicles and warehouses, or much more iterative modifications to drop-off plans. So where do we deploy the scooters? A lot of our other operator partners, like our friends at Bird, have also undertaken some of these practices. One of the biggest stories of the spring, though, has been how nimbly cities responded to the crisis. Overnight, cities like Oakland created a network of slow streets that would normally take years to implement, and some places like Seattle have already declared that they will not be changing those streets back. A number of cities have also been able to adjust these projects mid-pilot based on community feedback, noting that one solution does not work in every neighborhood, and it is important to meet the highest and most pressing needs. We also saw two of the largest markets to not legalize scooters, the UK and New York, specifically New York City, do so sooner than expected, at least in part to address transportation needs created by the pandemic. Specifically, we know that even though demand for public transportation is down, we also know that service is down even more, both in terms of the frequency of buses and trains, and also the carrying capacity, given that regulations are requiring people to be spaced 6 feet apart. So we are seeing buses be full, if you will, with only 10 or 12 people on them, and then they have to pass people who are waiting on the street. Thus, cities are now seeing scooters as more than a way to connect people to transit, and perhaps they are a way to actually supplement the actual transit trip itself. In the case of the UK, the legalization of scooters comes along with significant funding for infrastructure improvements to support it. Micromobility also offers a number of opportunities and challenges for cities in the post-COVID world. In recognition of the significant harm that can come with police being in charge of traffic enforcement, leading to some of the outcomes being protested right now, micromobility offers a way to manage a transportation mode that does not require in-person enforcement. So data-driven solutions like Ride Report mean cities can feel comfortable knowing operators are complying with rules while not needing to invade individual privacy or risk a volatile interaction with an enforcement officer. We've also seen many cities soften their stance on micromobility, moving from more adversarial to partnership like relationships, creating jobs, supplementing transit, and creating a model for other modes to follow on things like data sharing. Cities are still wanting to encourage alternatives to driving, and micromobility represents a transportation option that people are likely to trust because it is outdoors and it does not require sharing with anyone else during the ride. I think that we are going to start seeing more cities subsidizing its use, either through increased caps for the operators or reducing fees in the future. So to wrap, if any one of you want to dive deeper into this topic, I want to point you to a webinar series we ran this spring covering many aspects of micromobility. You can view any of them at the URL on your screen, which is my.ridereport.com/blog. Look for the Fireside Chats post. I learned a lot during them, and most of the content in this presentation was actually stolen shamelessly from them, so I benefited as well. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing more from the rest of the panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Jess. So before moving on to our next panelist, we'd like to launch another poll to see if our audience uses electric micromobility to connect to transit. So it's a simple yes or no. do you use electric micromobility to connect to transit? All right, it looks like we got it working so that you all can see the results. So as you can see, most of us on the call do not use electric micromobility to connect to transit. Great, thank you. You can go ahead and close that one out, Barrett. Thanks for your assistance. All right, so moving us right along, I'd like to turn it over now to Maurice, whom we can now see from Bird for about 5 minutes. And Maurice is going to give us a general overview of his company, Bird, and his role in it.
Great. Can you hear me okay? Great. Good evening. Maurice Henderson. As was mentioned before, I'm one of the directors of government partnerships domestically at Bird Rides, Inc. As Jess alluded to in her piece, and thank you for that intro, Jess, into the space. We were the originator of the electric scooter sharing model. So our founder and CEO, Travis van der Zayden, back in 2017, with a group of friends and former colleagues, after having been at a couple of the aforementioned TNCs, saw that the largest amount of trips were happening were about 5 miles or less. And he also noticed that the congestion issues that were being caused by TNCs in markets was something that was truly unsustainable. He was quite interested in trying to find a sustainable option that provided that first last mile sort of solution. And so with some engineers and others, bought some scooters off of Amazon, had some additional iPhones and other devices, put together an application, threw them on the scooters, put them out on the street in Santa Monica, and Bird was born. And so since then, there have been tens of millions of rides, as Jess has mentioned, across the globe. The adoption of e-scooters has been something that's been precipitous across the globe. Sorry, my puppy is a little anxious. Across the globe, the COVID pandemic has been, obviously tragic in so many ways, but it's also given cities and operators a real opportunity to scale quickly, to test some paradigms and operating models, to develop new partnerships. As Jess mentioned, there have been large markets like the New Yorks and UKs of the world that have been pondering scooters and now who are starting to activate programs. Many cities across the globe and domestically here in the US have implemented programs that either were sort of dormant and nascent and were thinking through things, or now have active programs on the street. Just yesterday, we found out about our partnership with the city of Chicago, one that we're really excited about, expecting others in the future. In terms of my job, and I think that's probably a pretty good segue there, what I do and my team does is we are working with cities, big C, on the regulatory environment. We're working on ensuring that our operations meet the compliance issues that were mentioned before in terms of the regulations, negotiating fee structures and things of that nature. But the other part, which is the small C city, which I think is actually the more important role that we also play, is the communities being served. So transportation is the great democratizer for access, for all of the things we talk about when we use the word equity, whether that's around education or economic opportunity or what have you. And so micromobility has provided a democratizing agent for people. Is it the perfect solution? Of course not. We'll continue to iterate. That's part of the beauty of technology and innovation, and all the tools and resources and assets that will be represented tonight are just a snapshot of what that can look like. That being said, it's had an incredible impact globally, by the number of users, by the number of companies that Jess alluded to in her presentation. Yes, there has been some industry consolidation. There probably will be more, but there will also be others who come up with great concepts. for vehicles and products that will continue to serve individuals. And for me and my team, part of our focus is making sure that we are understanding the needs of communities in a real and substantive way. That also helps inform our conversations with the big C city, with the city government partners when we're talking about those regulations, the workforce opportunities that come out of this. We've seen in most cities where we have 1,000 birds, it's usually created around 50 to a few hundred jobs or workforce opportunities. We hope to see that continue as we continue to reopen markets across the globe and certainly across the country. The other thing that I would say our team is really focused on is, now that this industry has been around for a couple of years now, in year 3, is really helping to change the conversation from the binary yes scooter or no scooter, right? I think we've mostly moved away from that, and we're in this position of how do we implement this tool and make it part of the transportation ecosystem. I appreciated Jess's comments about the connections to transit. One of the big pieces of what we were working towards, pre-COVID, was how do we make better partnerships? How do we establish better partnerships with transit authorities across the country and across the globe? Something that we were exploring in a number of different cities. Still think that's going to be an important piece of the work that we do. It's still going to be an important piece of the transportation conversation, because we certainly do not want to see a return to single occupancy vehicles as the transportation for but I'll leave it there and let the others present and look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Maurice. And I'm not sure, unless it was perhaps this phone caller that joined, but I don't believe we've got Joe on yet. So we'll move right along to Christian. Let me launch your slides here. And also just, so sorry, wrong thing. Slides. And just a quick reminder to please submit your questions in the attendee chat. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Christian.
Thank you very much. So I'm Christian. Greetings from Montreal, Canada. First of all, a big thank you to Fourth Mobility and the Ride Report for hosting this webinar tonight. Really happy to be here. So thank you for allowing us to introduce ourselves. We are Concept GEEBEE. We are a Canadian manufacturer of professional grade electric scooters. I say manufacturer because we are not an operator. And we've been around since 2013, trying to give fleet owners like cities and companies or private individuals a way to optimize their mobility. Our scooter is the GEEBEE, and this is what it looks like. And it's bicycle-sized scooter, electric scooter. As you can see from the size of the wheels and the tires, it's capable to go off-road, and it's sturdier and a little more stable than what we would typically think as being an electric scooter. It's really something in between a scooter and a bicycle or even a motorcycle. And I think we all recognize that there's many different pieces to electrifying transportation. We want to be a piece of the puzzle, and what we've tried to do is to introduce micromobility in the world of fleets, of fleet owners, and those are typically cities or corporations. And what we tell them is that as with an evening commute, you don't always need a car. You don't always need a car or a pickup truck. And it's a question of optimizing the choice that you have of using one vehicle versus another. And you don't need to replace it. What we're telling them is replace miles driven in cars or trucks with miles driven on micromobility when it makes more sense. And so as such, we typically sell to cities or companies in the tourist sector that use them for a variety of different reasons. So what you see here is a couple of customers in Canada, in the US, and in France. The GEEBEE is for sale in the US, and because it's a professional grade scooter, we tell them, look, you'll be saving versus using a car. You'll be increasing your productivity. You'll probably drive happier, if only because you know that you will have saved on some greenhouse gases. According to our calculation, over the lifetime of a GB, which is 50,000 kilometers, you can save up to 12 of greenhouse gas emissions. And so why would you want, as a commuter, why would you want a professional grade type of scooter? Well, because it's more stable, it's sturdier, and we like to think that it'll last longer than the lighter variety. You can take it on off-road, you can take it on all types of terrains. You can use professional gear, including fancy office shoes or high heels. And the difference between our scooter and the scooters that you find shared on streets of American cities is that on ours, your feet are side by side versus one in front of the other. And so you're literally standing on the scooter, and that's a very natural, intuitive position to be in. So the scooter will go 20 miles an hour, has a 40-mile range, and in order to show you a little better what it looks like, I'd like to show you a video, and I'd be happy to answer any questions afterwards.
Great, thank you, Christian. All right, so it looks like we've been joined by our fifth panelist, Joe. So I'd like to introduce Joe, but I think maybe just to make sure that he is settled in here, I'm going to go ahead and move forward and let Jack go next from Onewheel. So with that, Jack, take it away. And I know that you've got a video to let me launch when you're.
Sure. Well, hello everybody. I'm Jack Mudd. I run marketing at Onewheel, and I was the first employee. So I've had the pleasure of being a part for the journey and growth of our company. I would say, if it's possible, to play the video first, and then I'll chat about what we do afterwards.
Holy What is that? Introducing Pint.
Hey, does that have a motor?
Not that kind, that kind.
Where can I ride it?
Here, here, not here, but here.
Whoa.
Is it easy to learn?
Oh yeah.
Does it need a remote?
Nope, just lean forward.
How do you stop?
Lean back, forward, stomp it.
Hey, do a kickflip.
Can you take it with you?
Of course.
You think this is gonna go viral?
Yo, they posted our clip. What the? Heard it costs less than a smartphone. Really? Really?
My kid's gonna love it.
Yeah, you got it.
But as it feels, a bit of it hurts.
Unbelievable.
Awesome. Thank you. So I figure that that's a quicker and more efficient way of explaining what we do. We make Onewheels. There's 2 SKUs. There's the Onewheel Pint and Onewheel Plus XR, which is a little bit bigger and sort of more geared for people that want to ride off-road and go on larger adventures. But today, I figured that we'd talk a lot about, just like the overall trends of transportation and utility. And I wanted to touch a little bit on experience and emotion, because I think that those things are really important as well to electric vehicles. So I'll start with where my personal journey started, which is at the very beginning of 2014, when we were launching Onewheel and successfully founded it on Kickstarter. Really the only product that existed at the time that was somewhat comparable was Segway. So that was very fresh in our minds. And Segway, of course, had all of the technology and the promise behind it. It had the who's who, investor panel, and was really supposed to change how cities were built. That was the promise at the time. And it was in terms of B2C, it was a huge flop, right? And I think you could analyze why that is, but I think it can be distilled down to the fact that it just wasn't cool. People ultimately didn't want to be seen riding it. It didn't excite people and inspire people. So as soon as our Kickstarter project was funded, myself and our CEO Kyle sat down and had a very intentional conversation about what kind of brand we wanted to build. And we were inspired by the companies that built brands that were aspirational, that are more than just the product, right? You're talking about like the Nikes and the Patagonias and the GoPros of the world, particularly GoPro in 2014. So that's what we set out to do. For us, Onewheel needed to be about trying new things and an amazing riding experience, which we valued above all else in terms of the time spent engineering and adventure and going outside. And so we invested a lot, 6 years really, of time and energy building a brand that was totally not about transportation. And I know that that's like a little bit counter to what we're talking about here today, but I actually think that it's really connected, because I think, if you're going to try to, again, putting ourselves back in the 2014 mindset, it's like electric vehicles were kind of dorky and sort of like, undesirable, I think, at the time. And if you're going to change people's behavior in a meaningful way, I think building strong emotional ties, building a culture around how you move, creating ways that you move that really speak to people, not just about, oh yeah, this way to get to wherever I'm going is very efficient, but it's also a way that says something about who I am, right, or about who I want to be. And so I think that's been a really core component of Onewheel for us. And because we've invested just a lot of thought and time and money into making that what we are, I suppose, I think that it's looking back now, there is this amazing culture that we've sort of built and grown, and and social following and all of that. Of course, I'm a marketing mind, so this is what's near and dear to me. But yeah, I think that that has also helped us create a sustainable company in a landscape that is constantly changing. there's been lots of waves, right? There was the hoverboard boom and crash of what was that 2016 or something. Obviously shareable vehicles are now massive, right? And that sort of happened, in our timeline as well. But we've been able to grow, in now COVID, right? And I know that that's a part of this discussion as well. We've been able to grow through all of those environmental changes, because I think we have built this culture, and brand and product that people are just excited about, want to ride, and I think it's sort of changed. I hope that it's changed some of the perception about what it means to ride electric vehicles. Now, of course, there's lots of companies that are doing this, right? Tesla is very cool, I think, maybe depending on who you ask, and others. But I think, for me, being able to sort of watch that journey from sort of the very genesis of these products to now, where you walk down a city street, thanks to a lot of these shareable companies, and they're accessible to everyone. And I think that that's pretty amazing, in a pretty short period of time. So I like to think that we've played a role in that, and yeah, happy to answer anyone's questions. I know, like, the growth of the company was also a question that you guys sent over, and so I was the first employee, and now I'm proud to say that we have, I think we have the largest light electric vehicle factory in the Western Hemisphere, which is in San Jose, California. So we have, I don't know exactly how many people, but between 50 and 70 people, in our factory there, and then we have another 50 or 60 people in Santa Cruz, California, where we do R&D and marketing and customer support, operations, all that stuff. So yeah, it's definitely become a thing, which is pretty fun. So yeah, happy to answer any questions. Well, and thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Jack, for sharing your story and your perspective. So I believe we've got Joe on the phone. I'm going to go ahead and just introduce Joe, and then hopefully he can step in and share a few remarks for us. But Joe DeSimone is the Acting General Manager and Director of Service Delivery for Motivate LLC. He is responsible for the Citi Bike bike share system operations in New York City. Earlier this year, Joe spent 6 weeks in San Francisco helping with their e-bike launch, and came back to New York City right before COVID-19 swept through the country to take on the role of Acting General Manager. Joe, if you are on the line, we'd love to hear from you.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, and apologize for being late. Definitely had an emergency that I had to attend to, and rather than go into details, I'll share a bit more about me and my background. So thank you for the introduction. I am General Manager of Citi Bike in New York City, currently responsible for New York and Jersey City as a whole. I came over really to Citi Bike in 2016 to run their station tech operations. Started out really running. We have on-street stations that have docks, and it's really a heavily dock-based system. Helped improve the technology over the years. There's lots of solar and different technologies that are built into the stations themselves. Working my way up, finally became director of what is called our assembly and deployment team, who is responsible for picking up and putting the stations down on the street. And then ultimately, recently, the service delivery team, which does a lot of rebalancing. We do a lot of the pickup of the bikes each night to be repaired. And there's lots of logistics that goes into that team. 2018, Lyft came along. They acquired Motivate, and we became essentially the operator of all of Lyft systems across the U.S. So that includes 8 bike shares, everywhere from San Francisco to DC, Boston, Chicago, Portland. New York is the biggest one, and then we have a smaller one in Columbus, Ohio as well. So most recently, we have been affected by COVID, but we've really seen a strong return of ridership, especially in New York City. And as of late, we facilitate approximately 115,000 trips per day across all of our systems. And, roughly about 85 to 90,000 of those trips occur just in New York City alone. About 7.5% of those trips are actually from electric bike that's now in the system. We manage about 32,500 assets nationwide. Of those, approximately 33,000 assets, 8.5% are electric. And those assets really, bikes are secured by stations. It's primarily a dock-based system, but we do have some dockless products, which make up about 8% of our entire system. August 2018, we launched the first electric bike in New York City. And due to, some issues with really the technology, the product, we ended up pulling that back in April 2019 to actually relaunch it again this year. So we started the launch again in February of this year. We started with approximately 700 electric bikes on street in New York. And then Lyft created a new electric product that was first released in San Francisco. And I was actually out there for approximately two months helping the launch of their new product in San Francisco. And then came back in March, right before COVID hit, became the general manager, and then really helped the team kind of lead through all of, everything that was happening through the pandemic and the protesting and everything that was going on across the country. Most recently, we do see ridership picking up. There's lots of really good trends. People love the electric bikes that we have across our systems now. And the new product that we launched in San Francisco now is launching in cities like Chicago, DC, and Boston. So that's our latest focus. So that's general summary of me and what our company's been up to lately. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Joe. We're glad you were able to join us. And so with that, we've made it through our panelists. Thank you all so much. Before we head into our Q&A session, I've got one more poll for us that I think will help set the stage for some of the questions we'll be getting at. Barrett, if you could launch that last poll, thank you. Have you considered purchasing a micromobility vehicle because of the pandemic? All right, I see some numbers are starting to steady out, so definitely have some takers on the opportunity that exists now and certainly in our near future. Great, thanks all for responding, and with that we can close that poll out. And I'm going to invite Jess, co-moderator today, back up to the mic to help me facilitate questions. Again, another reminder to drop your questions into the attendee chat. And with that, Jess, would you like to lead us off with the first question?
Yeah, and I want to throw some hard balls. So y'all get ready, do some stretching. Just kidding. This is a question that was primarily directed towards Maurice, I think, but it really can touch all of you because you've been working in micromobility for so long. And it's kind of a two-parter. So what advice would you have for citizens, people like me, right, looking to influence their cities to think differently about micromobility? And then the flip side of that question is, what are the most significant challenges or barriers you as organizations face when partnering with cities? So it's kind of the two-parter of how do citizens help and what are some of the challenges that you face?
So thanks for the question. I'd say a couple things. One, when I think of the resident experience, and Jack talked about the importance of the rider experience, the UX. I know that's something that our company and Travis have really been hyper focused on. We went from early stage where we were had an off the shelf product to now having 3 generations of kick scooters that were in-house designed. I think one of the things that I think about through that evolution is how we looked at the rider experience, what the rider's emotional connection to both the product and the need that we were trying to provide a service to fulfill was. And when I think about the engagement piece that I sort of alluded to in my opening, residents have an incredibly powerful voice in the way that the city decides to shape its planning, right? So the way that we design streets, the way that we where we put our sidewalks, where we put our curb cuts, all of those things at many times are they're part of a larger comprehensive plan in cities, but a lot of times what gets done first is who has the loudest voice. I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, but in many cases that is how it happens. And so, part of our effort around education when we engage in communities is not just educating people on how you ride the vehicle or the various potential discount programs, for example, that are available for folks to be able to leverage the tools, but also the things that might be inhibitors for deployment. So, the second part of your question is about what are the hardest things to negotiate with cities on. Some of it is around, data and what data gets shared and doesn't get shared. Things around indemnification and cities asking to be indemnified for not just the negligence of the company or the product, but also for the poor planning and design and condition of the road. So I think there's a give and take that has to happen both with the operator and city. I think there's a great relationship and symbiosis that can happen with the city and residents and operators so that we can leverage the data that we have to understand the riding patterns of people, because that will also help to inform where investments happen or where lack of investment is a challenge. You find cities that have invested in a bike lane, for example, but nobody rides on it, and they're trying to figure out why that is. And so one of the things we've been able to discover in certain instances is, well, if you look at the riding patterns of people, they're avoiding that street because of either there aren't arterials that have other bike connections, there aren't neighborhood greenways nearby. There's a whole host of reasons, and our data can help inform city partners and help educate residents in a way so that they can advocate for themselves for the sort of investments that are necessary for their communities to be prosperous.
Thanks, Maurice. Joe, I'm wondering if you specifically have some insight on that too, obviously with bike town changes and then your experience in New York, the citizen perspective, how they can influence micromobility, but also your challenges with cities.
Yeah, sure.
So there you go.
Yep. So just apologize, I was just getting out of the car. What was the first part of the question?
Folks wondering about how citizens can influence their own city government to maybe take a different view of micromobility, welcoming it more into the streets, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big way the community has been involved, especially here in New York City, is all of the boroughs, they have meetings with their local communities. So the community boards play a huge role in even when we're citing new locations where we're going to be putting stations or new service areas, extensions. We'll always meet directly with the local communities. The community boards will be involved in every step of the way. and they'll have a lot of, options in terms of like where they want stations, where they don't want stations. And, it gives them a lot of, input. Ultimately, like a lot of the, local businesses and places that need, parking, or they have certain restrictions, they play a big role as well as far as like mapping out what that will look like. But I think essentially, like, it's surprising, like, especially like people of the community, how much influence they have, even just through, avenues like social media, Twitter. In this world nowadays, like everyone is so connected. So you're able to sort of reach out to, like the borough commissioner as an example, or local government official, and really have a voice, where in the past that was a lot more difficult. So, I think the world has become a lot smaller in that way. And, people are really able to influence, what is done and how quickly it happens. Which, sometimes that can hurt the situation, and, but oftentimes it ends up helping. So I know that, the community has played a big role, especially here in New York, not only when it comes to getting bike share expanded, but also the infrastructure that supports bike share, like bike lanes and other things like that.
Awesome. That's super helpful. Christian or Jack, do you want to add anything to that? Or anybody I'm forgetting? Okay. So maybe we'll take a little bit of a quick jump and talk a little bit about hardware, because I think we all have some insight to add there. Can you all talk to me a little bit about how your different vehicles are affected by the environment, weather, terrain, et cetera, and how does that affect their range? So how far they can go, or other considerations that users should have because of those variables?
Sure.
Thanks.
I guess I'll start. Yeah, so I guess Onewheels are considered water resistant. We don't. I think our IP rating is pretty solid, but we don't advertise it, because then people go and ride them in the ocean. So, so yeah, you can ride Onewheels darn near anywhere. Of course, the terrain that you ride on does affect how much range you get. Onewheels have an air-filled tire, so if you're riding off-road, you're probably going to get less. If you ride with lower tire pressure, you're going to get less range as well. So yeah, the environment definitely does affect the experience that you have and the range that you get. But it also affects, how much fun you have too. So that's part of it.
I'll take a stab at it as well. Obviously, we all know how weather and temperature affects the mileage. However, as far as I know, as far as I've heard, it does not seem to affect micromobility. I don't have any specific reason why. Is it because it's shared for the shared micromobility, and you can drop it off and pick up another one that's fully loaded? In our case, the users are different, and they know where they need to go. They're professionals using the GEEBEE scooter for work. That's maybe a reason. The last reason I can think of is the fact that micromobility doesn't need infrastructure to recharge. Typically, you either take the whole vehicle or the battery. You can take the whole vehicle or the battery with you inside and just plug it in a normal standard outlet.
So I'll jump in. As I mentioned, we've gone through an evolution in terms of the development of our vehicles. I mentioned that we had an off-the-shelf product in our first couple of generations, and then last year introduced the Bird Zero, which was our first in-house design, built, manufactured product. That vehicle's, we like to say internally, it's our workhorse. It's now 2 years old, is in the majority of markets, continues to run strong, has a battery life of I believe it's 30 plus miles on a full charge. The Bird One, which came out later last year, has a even stronger battery. We're hopeful for an even longer existence, based on our early life cycle analysis of vehicles, looking like it's going to be, a year and a half to 2 years as well. And now we've come out with the Bird 2, which is on the streets in cities like San Francisco. We'll be in Chicago and others. An extended battery life there as well. We're projecting a long life cycle for it. So every iteration of our vehicles has the sustainability piece that's an important part of the work generally. And what's bearing out is that vehicles are lasting. That is in every kind of climate you can think of. So, we're in Arizona where you're dealing with the summer heat and desert heat. You're dealing with the hills of San Francisco and the microclimates of Portland, Oregon, and all of these vehicles are running strong. Obviously, to Jack's comment about water resistance, we've continued to stress test the vehicle against certain conditions. There's been lots of stories in the past about folks throwing scooters into bodies of water, which we're still not, advocating for, obviously. But the technology on our vehicles is such that they are impervious to water up to a certain depth and up to a certain time limit. And we'll continue to make those improvements, taking into account that things do happen. But certainly we've been really impressed with the longevity of the vehicle, their ability to withstand several different types of environments and conditions. It has been largely a seasonal tool, but I've seen firsthand in cities like Columbus, Ohio, for example, people riding, birds during snowstorms. So, I think that weather conditions certainly do not deter folks who have a need to get from place to place. And if the vehicle is available, people will ride it.
Awesome. Thank you, Maurice.
Yeah, so
I'm going to flip.
Sorry. Oh, my apologies. From an operator point of view, I agree with most points. I think the one thing in general is that, most of these vehicles, if not all of them, are using some sort of lithium technology for batteries. And, lithium is inherently flawed in a lot of ways. And, I think that the technology and the hardware has a long ways to go before it's really sort of in the best state. And, there are problems, especially when it comes to heat. You could run into situations and water where you potentially have shorts and or, potential for fire. Lithium technology is extremely unstable, so you have to be really careful with it, especially if you have any large scale, operations where you're charging batteries and or, transporting them, because there's, always potential for heat and or damage to happen to them. Cold introduces another issue where, if you leave your phone outside, as an example, has a lithium battery in it in the winter, it's not going to last as long as it does when, the temperatures are normal. So that is part of the problem with lithium, is that, in colder climates, your range will be decreased based on, the battery technology that's used. So, I think where, in like a normal state, you're going to get, like a 30-mile range out of, some sort of e-bike product. I think, ultimately, I would hope that over time, especially in the coming years, that the technology can improve. The other issue with the batteries is that they're heavy. You have to transport them for swapping and recharging. It becomes logistically extremely challenging and really laborious at the end of the day to actually accomplish those tasks. So very difficult to scale an e-bike or an e-product operation because of those reasons. And ultimately it takes a certain type of skill set to be able to do that.
Thanks, everyone. We've had a couple of questions speaking to disadvantaged communities in a couple of ways. Questions about, are there good models for government OEM partnerships to provide micromobility to low-income residents? and then also thinking about the workforce opportunities that are focused on disadvantaged communities. Tied in with that a little bit, shared micromobility often relies on low-paid gig economy workers that are without benefits. Is there a plan to move away from that model? So I think the larger level theme is, how are you, if it's a part of what you're thinking about, supporting those disadvantaged communities, either through employment opportunities or programs that are helping everybody access micromobility, whether it's somebody riding a bird scooter or potentially somebody getting access to a Onewheel as an example.
Well, I'd love to take this question. It's one of the main focuses of my work. So Bird offers a host of discount programs, as do other micromobility providers. So first and foremost, making sure that these vehicles are accessible at a price point that works for folks is something that's critically important to us. In San Francisco, we acquired Scoot last year. They had a community Scoot program, which was a 50% discount off the price of a regular ride. With our Bird Access program, it's $5 per month for 30 minutes of unlimited trips that you can take. We have Bird Moves. We've made investments in partnering with community-based organizations who help to identify individuals and communities who are their clients and partners who are in need of these first and last mile provisions. So we've done things like direct rental programs. In terms of the workforce investment piece, one of the things that we do, and one of the things I'm most proud of, are the partnerships that we're starting to develop with workforce organizations and cities, starting folks in work as mechanics. Somebody mentioned chargers. We're looking at different models for rebalancing. In certain cities, there are certain requirements around workforce in terms of gig versus non-gig. I think you could make arguments for both. I think if you talk to a number of the folks who are out rebalancing fleets and doing that work, one of the things that they would argue was the flexibility that they find in the work, the time that they can actually do this job versus having a job with benefits and certain hours that they have to work and things of that nature come at a cost as well. And so I think there's two sides to that particular story. But this has really been, I used the word democratizing agent earlier, an opportunity for folks who normally would not have access to, quote, high tech industry to find another pathway in. And so, we have stories of individuals who started as, chargers who are now operating and managing their own fleets in markets as GMs for Bird, or as partners through other ventures that we have, like our Bird platform program. So I think there's a number of different ways that at least Bird as a partner in communities has been trying to solve for those problems. I know that other operators are doing somewhat similar things, but I'm really proud of the work that we do in this particular space. Obviously, it's something that we will continue to strive to improve on, because we obviously haven't quite solved all of those problems, and nor would we be in a position to do so. But certainly something that we are intentional in our engagement for authentic engagement with community.
That's very cool. Maurice,
you want to jump on that one, Jack?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can touch on, I guess from our perspective, getting this product, imagined and developed and then into market is like a feat unto itself for a small team. And so I think, at first, like that's the main challenge that we're trying to accomplish, and do it in a way that's, elegant and fun for the user. And Onewheel started at $1,500, and then we actually made one more expensive at $1,800, and that's quite a bit of money, obviously. The most recent product that we made is called Onewheel Pint, and actually to your point, Maurice, our mantra there is democratizing Stoke. So trying to make the feeling of one wheel riding more available to more people. So it's $950, which I realize is still a lot of money. But from what I can see, based on just social media and talking to folks, is in the beginning of our life cycle, you're definitely getting the early adopter crowd who has all the toys. Nowadays, that's no longer the case. You're seeing people who realize that, well, maybe if I own an electric vehicle that does cost $950 over its life cycle, which is quite a long time, you're actually saving a lot of money, by not doing the other behaviors that you have, whether it's car insurance or gas or your Metro card. It depends on your, your behavior and your commutes and all that. But yeah, we're definitely seeing just more diversity in the people who ride one wheels, which is really exciting. And then obviously for us, the other piece is that we do make them in America, which we're really proud about. So a lot of folks of different socioeconomic backgrounds, grow and benefit from the growth of our company as well, from that aspect. So yeah, I mean, I would love to make one wheels that are, $200. It's, and everyone can have one. They're, more accessible, but just with where technology is and the costs associated with, it's funny. We get comments on Facebook all the time that are like, man, why can't you just make one for $300? And it's like, I'll tell you what, this is probably the lowest margin product that you buy that, that exists in your home. But folks don't quite understand that. But yeah, I think democratizing the Stoke is definitely a major mission of ours, and I hope that we can continue to work at that.
Yeah, so for us, I mean, that mostly happens on, the commercial side with Lyft. They've been great partners with the communities, especially during COVID. Even going to, as far as offering free memberships, annual memberships to essential workers. So they did that for, a good chunk of the COVID pandemic so far, which really has opened up the product to be used in multiple different systems and in kind of different ways. So we've had to adapt to sort of where the hospital locations are. We've set up, disinfecting valet locations there so that we can take inbound bikes and we can disinfect them for the staff or, the people that are coming to the hospital facilities. And, ultimately try to make it, a safe product to be able to use. Beyond the free memberships, for a long time, both, Citi Bike and Motivate and prior to Lyft, and Lyft has continued this, they're also offering, $5 annual memberships to, people that, are in need in low income communities that are actually within the service area. So that's also been really helpful to give access to a lot more people, to be able to actually utilize the product for whatever transportation needs that they have. So those two things I think combined have made a major impact with the communities, and we definitely see the ridership impact and the benefits from that.
Christian, I'd love to hear your perspective on it from the Canadian point of view, and I'd also love to hear a little bit about what the government has done in Canada, because I think we're all generally U.S. based here. How have they been supportive for electric transportation in general?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag picture. At one level, the federal authorities will legislate on the type of on what constitutes a vehicle. But at a different level, it's up to the provinces to decide what they authorize on their streets and what they don't. And so Quebec has authorized micromobility for all of the cities, and it's then up to operators to negotiate with cities to have the scooters on the streets. Concept GEEBEE has its own approval for the last 2 years. We're allowed to ride anywhere in the whole of Quebec.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else want to jump in on just what they've seen worldwide in terms of support for electric vehicles? Like I said, I know we have a generally U.S. focused view here.
No, I was gonna give a shout out to Italy. I mean, they were, to my knowledge, the first countries to support the purchase of electric bikes and electric scooters with a subsidy. And I know that's something that other countries have been looking at. Some are, in the process legislatively. Some, are thinking about how to make that happen. We also have a retail market for our vehicles as well. So you can buy the Bird One at Best Buy, and we're offering a discount through that. We're looking at some different opportunities, potentially drive the price point down there. Right now, it's I think it's selling at $9.99, so we're right around where Jack's one wheel is for the Bird One. You can also get some of the older versions of our vehicle. The old Segway 9-bot vehicle, I think, is selling on Amazon for $250 or $300. And so, there's certainly a desire on our part to find some price points that will work for a greater number of people. Certainly trying to work with organizations like it was mentioned before that I'm on the board of Fourth. Certainly an organization that has looked for ways to find subsidy to support the electrification of the grid and of the mobility playing field. And so this is certainly one of those segments that we're really interested in. And that Italian model, for one, is something that I think other governments should take a look at for replication.
Thanks, Maurice. That's awesome. I've been talking a little bit with some cities, the city partners specifically, in Raleigh as an example. They're working on some new legislation because right now they have a scooter as a moped. They don't have a definition of a scooter. And there was a question that came in that said, it seems as though the market for electric vehicles that fit between e-bike and electric motorcycle, like a Vespa, could be a great way to get people out of cars. Do any of you know of a national movement or even an international movement to classify this gray area without the need for a motorcycle endorsement or any other requirements? I saw you giggle. I want you in there.
I'm giggling only because this is one of the conversations we were having earlier today. I don't know about a particular movement, but as some folks may know, last year, one of the other form factors that we came out with was the Bird Cruiser. So it was essentially an e-bike / e-moped. We are in the US, we have largely produced it with a peg instead of pedals. We've leveraged the pedals in some international markets and are actually looking to at least 1 or 2 US markets to test the pedal version of that soon. I bring it up because in our efforts to get it essentially certified as a vehicle that could be street ready, cities like San Francisco, the state of California, state of Texas, Pennsylvania, and others, we had to find some loopholes in existing legislation to be able to classify the vehicle, to be able to make it street ready. So in California, it has to be plated. In Texas, it also needs to be plated. We haven't gotten it on the ground in Pennsylvania yet. But this is certainly an active conversation that we, Bird, and I know others in the industry are thinking through as they're looking at different form factor vehicles in the near future.
Do others have perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of bike share, the challenge has really been with local regulations. Trying to get the local regulations to actually catch up to where the industry is heading. In terms of electric bicycles, as an example, like the challenge in New York City is that you have, really 2 types of electric products when it comes to a bicycle. One is throttle based, where you can actually turn a throttle and it will accelerate. The other one is pedal assist, where you actually have to pedal to propel the vehicle forward. And for a long time, especially in New York, both types were technically illegal. Recently, we've been able to get legislation passed that sort of opens up the market a bit more than it was before, at least allowing pedal assist. The throttle, which if you're ever in New York City, most of the people that use the electric bikes to get around, to do food deliveries and things like that, like last minute deliveries or last mile deliveries, will be using the throttle based machines. That's kind of like a big business, and unfortunately, like what happens when those sorts of things are illegal is those products end up getting confiscated at scale. So I think like the legislation, and everything still has a long ways to go to catch up. But I think ultimately the bike shares, at least that we have operating in 8 different cities, have helped move the regulations along faster than maybe they would have without it. Just because we're creating products, we're creating a system that is it's stable, we can maintain it, we can keep the product up, and then again, like I mentioned before, there's other things like infrastructure that also has to catch up with everything that else is going on in the market. So having proper bike lanes, especially if they're protected, and setting up the city in a way where even if you have an electric product that average speeds are going to be higher than say a classic bike, that there is a safe environment for people to be able to operate it.
Christian or Jack?
I don't
It's one of those things where like some people want to dance and some people are like, no, I'm good, I want to stay out. So.
No, I mean, I think it's I think we're a pretty classic example of technology being ahead of legislation. I mean, like, what the heck is a Onewheel? No one knows, but it's starting to become something that you see, on a weekly or daily basis, depending on where you live. And yeah, there's a lot of markets that are not well adjusted for that. I know for us, I think legislation is fine generally in the U.S., but like Germany is a huge market for us, and Onewheels are basically illegal in Germany, so you have to ride them on private property. And I know some of the bigger rideshare companies, right, can have the bandwidth to talk to these cities and play an active role in shaping the future of legislation, which I think is really important, because these products, are clean and help people move around, and I think are really net positive. And I think I'm under the impression that a lot of laws are from an era where people were strapping, gas motors to their bicycle, which are loud and have all kinds of issues. So, but yeah, for us, like it's difficult because we even as the laws are being negotiated now, the future laws that will dictate who can go where, and on what, there's form factors that don't exist yet that may exist in the future that this may or may not take into account, because we're dealing with what has existed, and the rate at which things are being developed is so much more progressive, and I don't think that's going to change. So I think I can say from our standpoint, that's like it's a real inhibitor to our growth, really. And I think it's like also a bummer for on a market by market basis, for folks who have antiquated laws that don't allow them to access the full, toolkit that we should have, I think.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the question I think Jess had asked towards the beginning about how do residents engage and help. I mean, one of the things that we certainly leverage, and I know others do as well, is we leverage our riders. Our riders are residents of these cities, and we inform them about legislation that's potentially pending. We inform them about budgetary issues, whether that's additions to something that we want to see or cuts to something that we want to save. And a lot of times those riders' voices are extraordinarily important in state capitals and city halls. Mm-hmm. And so, I totally agree with Jack that, having been somebody on the other side of this who was helping to write the requirements and the regulations and the code, government does not quite move as fast as the innovations that we see. But, I know that government does make every effort to try to be as inclusive in that space as possible. And I've been impressed by my former colleagues' largely willingness to recognize that we may not be fully prepared with the things that we have on the books today. So let's see what we can make work to at least get this on the street, test a few things, test a few theories, make some mistakes, and make those adjustments. And I applaud regulators who are willing to do that. Obviously, not everyone comes from that sort of mindset, which is unfortunate. But we do our best to try to drive partnership that fully engages the community, that gives the city sort of the protections that it needs, and also allows us to provide a viable product and a sustainable business, a profitable one.
Thanks, Maurice. That's really good. And it helps me pivot a little bit too. So we're getting close to the end of our time. And as we've talked about from the beginning here, and then just what Maurice mentioned, the residents are really, really important in order to make micromobility work, as we say at Ride Report. So for our last question, what I'd like to do is I'd like to do just a quick round robin, if you will, to say, maybe what's the one thing you think that would help micromobility really scale or help with adoption? So is it something hardware related? Is it something policy related? If you could have anybody fix one thing, what would that be? And Christian, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think I'd come back to the last topic, topic of discussion, which was legislation. We sell in Canada, we sell in different provinces in Canada, we sell in the US, we sell in different provinces, different states in the US, we sell in Europe, and it's all over the map. In some areas, we're considered a scooter. In some areas, we're considered a bicycle, with advantages, disadvantages. So, in short, on a national, federal level, it would be an advantage. And I come back to what Jack just said about being an inhibitor to growth. We're a startup trying to grow and trying to convince big cities that they have many advantages to using micromobility, and city employees would like to, but in many instances the legislation won't allow them to. So uniform legislation would be the answer.
Depending on the legislation.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess I'll hop in. I'll go in a different direction. I think that the experience of riding these devices is really powerful. I think once you hop on a scooter or a bike or a Onewheel or anything that's electric, if you haven't done that before, it really shows you that these things can be superpowers. Like as someone who has been able to experience that in my life for many years now, like I cannot imagine not riding electric vehicles to do lots and lots of things, whether it's like go over to the store to get some milk or whatever. I think once you try these, riding electric vehicles, you'll probably want to make that a part of your life, because you just realize how much sense it makes, how much fun it can be, how efficient it can be, how liberating it can be, and democratizing as well. So I think, like, actually for us, I think the rise of fleet vehicles has been really powerful, because there hasn't been a way for a lot of people to try these devices before. And I think, the fact that you can walk down your street and hop on a scooter or a bike, I think is a wonderful thing for the entire industry, because it really shows just how practical and fantastic these things can be. So yeah, to anyone watching who is interested, like go rent something, hop on something. I know that we have about 500 retailers in the U.S. and a handful in Europe as well, and they'd be happy to give you a demo. So go over there and hop on and go see for yourself. Because once you do, you won't, you'll find whichever one speaks to you and your risk tolerance and whatever, and it'll be a part of your life because it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll second that. I think I completely agree. Electric vehicles are phenomenal, whether that's a one wheel, a scooter, a bicycle, a revel, a moped, a car. It's pretty amazing. I think just in general, the industry has a lot of, like I said, catch up to do when it comes to the technology, especially when it involves the batteries, because I think that's really the weakest link. But ultimately, like, I agree. I think it changes people's lives in a lot of ways. And, I think as an operator, the biggest challenge really comes back to keeping the availability of the vehicles high enough for the usage. The ridership per bike, especially with the electric bikes compared to a classic bicycle in New York City, is sometimes 5x more. So it's pretty impressive in terms of how many people are using the product. Especially right now, we have a pretty big imbalance between a classic bicycle fleet and an electric bicycle fleet. Now, over time that will increase, and hopefully eventually it'll start to teeter totter in the opposite direction, where the electric bike fleet is higher than the classic fleet. And I can see that sort of on the horizon. But I think as an operator, especially due to the technology, one of the things holding us back is the ability to keep them available. And really what that goes back to is the efficiency of the overall product system. But then also, the biggest thing is the battery. Is it heavy? How long does it last? How difficult is it to change out? Like others mentioned, do you have to bring that vehicle back to a facility to be swapped, or can you swap them directly in the field? And all of that comes into play. Recharging can be expensive. Between the infrastructure, the manpower involved, the electricity that you're using. So I think there's lots of things that come into play. But ultimately, if I could pick, probably one thing to improve upon, it would be the technology itself.
Yeah, I'll just finish off by saying thank you for allowing us to have this forum, and for the great questions and the great panel that Forth and Ride Report put together. One of the things that Joseph mentioned, I would say uncapping the market, meaning put in dynamic capping, let utilization and ridership drive the number of vehicles that are placed in areas. If you really want to address the equity concerns that somebody mentioned in one of their questions, allow us the space to put enough vehicles in cities so that we can make the money to support the various areas of the city that need these vehicles, these options. Part of the biggest challenge, and I think Joe would agree with me and others, that when the city prescribes a number of vehicles based on what they think is the right sort of mixture, generally speaking, they miss the mark, because then you're driving operators to have to put vehicles in places where they know they're going to get rides in order to make revenue, to try to offset some of the costs for some of the other more expensive pieces of the operation. So if there was one thing that I would certainly love to see, is cities take the restrictions off of prescribed caps. I loved what Christian said about the idea of oh God, now I lost my point. I'm sorry. The cap piece would be a huge opportunity there. Another thing that I think some cities are thinking about, I know certainly Portland is one, is how do you have charging infrastructure sort of built in. So that would also be something for the future to think about. But again, thank you for this opportunity tonight.
Yeah, thank you to everybody for participating. Kelly, we still got you. You fuzzed out for a second there.
I did. Yes, I'm back now.
Great.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and close this out. I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists and to you, Jess, Ride Report, for co-hosting this webinar with us. Great conversations tonight. Thank you all again. This recording will be on Ford's YouTube page starting tomorrow. So if you're interested in sharing it around, we'll be sure to get those links to you. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and I'll be sending you to the invite page for our next webinar, Evening Commute, which is on electric motorcycles. It'll be great in just a few weeks. So everyone have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.